I know, everyone is talking about this and making videos and posting things. It's been talked about a lot, but you know what? I am frustrated, so I just gotta get it out of my system. So, Scarlett Johansson is the latest cisgender actor to play a transgender actor in an attempt to get that sweet, sweet Oscar. This comes after she played the whitewashed lead in Ghost in the Shell instead of letting that role go to an Asian actor. And apparently that movie totally tanking at the box office didn't teach Scarlett Johansson or the director Rupert Sanders anything, because they've teamed up again for Scarlett Johansson to play another role that makes no sense for her. She is going to play Dante Tex Gill, a trans-masculine person from the 70s, in an upcoming movie called Rub and Tug. Historical records say that he liked to be known as a man and called Mr. Gill, and we will get more into his identity later, but suffice it to say for now that, he did not just identify as a butch lesbian. And I know, cis people play trans people all the freaking time, and I don't love it, but I've even let it slide in the past when it seems that the actor and filmmakers are actually doing their research and talking to trans people, maybe even admitting that they effed up but didn't realize it until they were too far in. Cause, we've gotta take baby steps towards representation. But I've been saying baby steps for many years now, and they have not turned into real steps towards any change, so I'm getting frustrated. But the real thing that set me off was Scarlett Johansson's apology. Lack thereof. Not an apology, response. It was an angry, accusatory, placating, frankly kind of confusing response, not an apology. Her rep said to any trans people or allies that might have been upset about this decision, tell them that they can be directed to Jeffrey Tambor, Jared Leto, and Felicity Huffman's reps for comment. Okay, first of all, they all got the same backlash. Just because they all won awards doesn't mean that any of us trans folks or our allies were ever okay with them playing those trans roles. But also, how out of touch do you have to be to list someone who was just outed as an abuser, specifically an abuser of the trans women on set when he was playing a trans woman? How out of touch do you have to be to list him as an example of a good actor doing the right thing? What? I've jumped an octave. I'm so outraged. Another thing, the director said that she was perfect for the role. Okay, cool. One thing, here is a photo of Scarlett Johansson, and here is a photo of Dante Tex Gill. Am I missing something? I mean, I'm about to go watch a documentary on identical triplets, so maybe I'll understand the identical thing later, but these two do not, I don't see the perfect role thing here. And even if you want to try to claim that Mr. Gill didn't identify totally as male, which his obituary completely refutes, by the way. His obituary says Dante Tex Gill, always the woman who prefers to be known as a man, always insisted that he was a man, told everyone he wanted to be known as Mr. Gill, might have even undergone initial stages of sex change that made him appear masculine. Dude totally identified as male. Now, I will say often when you look back on history, it can be difficult to put today's labels on people who had different terminology and concepts at their disposal, but this dude's literally got receipts. But even that aside, going back to Scarlett Johansson and whether she is the perfect person for this role, Kivon on Twitter brings up a great point about how the producers are effectively skinny washing Mr. Gill. Predominant trans culture and the media has a big problem with mostly putting white, thin, able-bodied trans people front and center. And that's what would continue to be happening if you have someone like Scarlett Johansson playing someone like Mr. Gill. So if you want someone who is perfect for the role, here's a handful of trans actors who are 1, actually trans-masculine, and 2, actually look like the damn guy. Believe it or not, I don't actually want to keep talking about this particular situation because it's gonna be outdated. Soon enough, there's gonna be another cis actor playing a trans actor, and this video is going to be relevant all over again. So I want to actually talk about the bigger issue here, which is that trans actors should be playing trans roles, and explain why that is. And first of all, I do want to say that I grew up acting. I have dabbled in and out of the film and entertainment industry in various capacities throughout my whole life, so I'm not just speaking from an out-of-touch activist who doesn't know how the industry works perspective. I actually do kind of know how these things work. And I'll give cis actors a bone here. I totally get why they would see playing a trans person as a good, meaty role that they can sink their teeth into. Playing characters that are super different from you is a thrilling and challenging exercise. It can be a ton of fun, it can prove your chops as an actor, and yeah, it might win you an Oscar or some other accolade. So if you don't know anything about why it's wrong, of course you'd say yes. But here's why you shouldn't. First, and maybe most importantly, it furthers dangerous stereotypes of transgender people. Only 16% of Americans say that they know a trans person. While this can seem staggering to those of us who live in trans bubbles, I can't tell you how often I I have conversations with people and they tell me that I'm the first trans person they've ever spoken to, or at least, had a conversation about trans people with, because they've probably met more trans people than they realize. But the point is that this mainstream representation of trans people is pretty much the only education on us that most people are getting. Trans people, especially trans women of color, are murdered at horrendously higher rates than the general population. And most of that is done by cis men who thought that the women were tricking them, or that their own masculinity was being threatened by these men pretending and wearing dresses. It's sickening, it's horrific, it's completely wrong, and it happens because the media continues to further the narrative that trans women are just men playing dress up or trying to trick people. And that could not be further from the truth, but how are people supposed to know that when there's next to no accurate representation or education about trans people in our nation? I mean, our educational system has a lot to learn in general, and then especially when it comes to sex ed, and then especially when it comes to gender and sexualities that are not heteronormative. There are an increasing number of bills out there right now that are trying to make it illegal to teach anything about LGBTQ+ issues in schools. There's also a couple out there right now that are trying to make school counselors out trans students to their parents. So our educational system is completely lacking when it comes to trans issues, which means it's on the media to pick up the slack. And we're doing as much as we can to further representation out here on YouTube, but apart from the algorithm and the age restriction and the anti-LGBT ads, these types of videos here on the internet are only being seen by people who are seeking them out, people who want to learn more about trans people. Or maybe hate watch us and, leave comments telling us to kill ourselves. Our videos aren't gonna automatically show up to mainstream middle America, like major motion pictures and primetime TV do. So that's where our country's education on trans issues is coming from, and when mainstream entertainment does it poorly, it has real world implications on trans people. But I'll dial it down a notch. Let's talk about the other reason that trans roles should go to trans actors that you hear about a lot, and this is that trans actors need a shot at something. There are lots of trans actors out there. Trust me, I am in a Facebook group of trans actors and there are a bunch of us. But for all sorts of reasons, trans actors very, very rarely get cast in cisgender roles, which means that trans roles, when they exist, are kind of the only option for a lot of trans actors. So then when a cis person takes the trans roles as well, trans actors are left with nothing. And that brings us into the next argument that people who don't understand why trans roles should go to trans actors always bring up, which is that you need a big name in a movie for it to get funded and for it to be popular and people to go see it and for it to get press. I get that. But how are trans actors ever gonna become big household names if they're not given the chance to even start out and grow up to that point? If they're not given any roles to help them get to the point where they will be a household name? Laverne Cox is amazing, but there's just one of her. But I also just want to retire this argument altogether because, and I don't know if you know this, but most movies have more than one actor. Just because the lead actor who is a trans character is gonna be played by a trans actor that maybe not a lot of people know, doesn't mean that the other opposite lead who's a cisgender character or all of the supporting characters who are cisgender characters can't be played by huge massive names that'll bring out the money and the press. The big name does not have to be just the one trans character who, also because these are usually being written by cis people, the cis character ends up being more of the lead anyway because it's from the cisgender gaze. On that note, let's also hire trans writers and trans directors and trans everything else in the film industry when you're trying to responsibly tell a trans person's story. Okay, cool. But then of course, when we start talking about things like that, we hear cis people always saying well, why don't you just create your own stories? Girl, we're trying! There are so many trans web series and short films and documentaries and all sorts of stuff that are made entirely by trans people, and we've got GoFundMes and we got Kickstarters and Indiegogos. We are trying to get those out there. Do you realize how hard it is? I mean, it's hard for anyone in the film industry to make it on that kind of indie level, but when you've got an entire trans team, we are trying. I will leave a list in the description box of a whole bunch of really great trans-backed projects that you can go support and you can watch and love and share around. We're working on it. And on that note, we should all be watching Pose on FX, the new show about drag balls. It has a record-breaking number of trans actors in it and also co-written and co-directed by Janet Mock. Give that show all of the views and ratings and money that you can. Also, talking about trans actors and filmmakers, I want to plug this video that my friend Oliver helped make with Screen Crush and GLAAD a couple years ago. It is filled with trans actors all telling you in their words why Hollywood needs to treat them better. All right, I'm almost off my soapbox, but I got just one last thing to say here. So I'm making this big stink right now about how wrong Scarlett Johansson is and how mad at her I am, and I am. Because again, it is one thing to properly apologize and then, maybe even atone for your mistakes and step down from the role. But it is quite another to double down on your position and then shout back at the marginalized community that is rightfully calling you out. So yeah, I'm pretty pissed right now. But am I still gonna see the next Marvel movie that Scarlett Johansson's in? Yeah, I probably am. Because I'm trash. And you know, like in the grand scheme of the giant Marvel Cinematic Universe, she only has like a small role, and it's not like it was a trans character that she's playing. Although, trans male actor Murray Hill did point out that he is available to play Black Widow in the next film if she needs it, since, you know, she took this one away from trans male actors. Now that is a Marvel movie I would want to see. You know, I probably also shouldn't be supporting Mark Ruffalo by seeing Marvel movies after he initially had a pretty salty response to the trans community when we called out the movie he produced with Matt Bomer, where Matt Bomer, a cis actor, played a trans woman. But I don't want to hate Mark Ruffalo or Scarlett Johansson or Matt Bomer with those beautiful blue eyes, or Eddie Redmayne, for that matter, who some of you may know I love for reasons that are complicatedly related to this. Instead of having to hate them all forever, I want them to learn from this and spread what they've learned to the rest of Hollywood and stick up for trans people, especially fellow trans actors and filmmakers. And I know that might seem like a lofty dream, but like, come on! Over the past year, we have seen that change can happen in Hollywood, and that you can still get your freaking Oscar when you do the right thing. So to any cisgender actors, just think twice if you get offered a trans role, and when people call you out, listen to them, and be nice, and think about your response for a second, and maybe, you know, don't point out an abuser of trans people as an example of someone who's doing it right. Just a suggestion. Well, thank you for listening to me rant on this. I hope you got something out of it as well. Down in the comments, please leave your favorite trans actors. Let's give them some good vibes and some promo. And hey, make sure you're following me here on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button for new videos every Wednesday-ish. And also follow me on Instagram at JackIsNotABird. That's what I am on all social media. Also, I do have a podcast called Transmission where I try to amplify the narratives of trans people. It's coming back soon, I promise. But you can listen to existing episodes on Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. That is it for now. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.